Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with the Superlative podcast. Please listen to aBlogtoWatch's other program, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest watch news and reviews. Today on Superlative, my guest is Andrew Herman. He is the co-founder of Panzera Watches from Australia. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ariel. Very nice to be here.
So I've only been to Australia once. I find the country fascinating. I know that as like many people, I'm interested in it. But what I did not realize until later in life was that there's a lot of watch love in Australia. A lot of our audience comes from Australia. And I learned this because Australians are some of the loudest. We've had people on this program who live in Australia. Not all of them are native Australian, but I want to use this opportunity, in addition to talking about Panzera, to understand a little bit about your market. Is that cool?
That sounds really good. Happy to talk about that, Ariel.
So let's first establish when you got into the watch industry. I know that probably close to 15 years ago or so, I think maybe you started the brand. And
2009.
I'm guessing 2009.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that before that you were an enthusiast. Talk a little bit about getting into the watch industry, the business.
Yeah, well, look, it's always been a passion of mine. I've loved watches ever since I was a teenager. And it's sort of always I used to collect watches. And one of the things I found very frustrating was, and I think a lot of collectors probably have the same experience, is that traditional watches tend to be very expensive. If you want a nice quality watch that you're proud to own, you tend to have to fork out quite a lot of cash. And hence, it wasn't something I could buy a lot of back in the early days, especially when I was young. And so I started investigating some of the lower cost watches that were coming out of places like Germany and found them to be quite good.
Great
and
stuff.
I had an opportunity then to, with a friend of mine, Roger Cooper, who had a good retail background, we wanted to start up a business. And I said, well, why don't we look at importing watches into Australia? And I said, I've got this brand, there's a couple of brands that are out of Germany. They seem very good value and not too expensive. Let's see if we can bring them in. And that's how the whole concept started. We started importing watches into Australia.
And what was that like? I mean, the import business, obviously different than the brand business, that's quite traditional. That made a lot of people money decades ago in the watch industry. These days, while it still makes sense, it seems to be harder. Was that successful for you?
It was a hard slog. And it also made me realize, because the objective we had when Roger and I got together was not just to be a watch importer, but let's try and find watches that are good value so the people that want to collect them can buy, 5
people
a
like
year.
You.
Yeah, buy as many as they want, rather than having to save up for 5 years to buy the next one. But have quality. And so we started looking, and it made us realize the inefficiencies of the watch industry were huge, because we were a watch distributor, right? And so we had to buy the watch, bring them in. We got paid a commission, and then we distributed them out to the retailers, and the retailers would then distribute them out to the customers. We'd have to try and manage stock based on how many watches each retailer would sell. We didn't know what they were going to sell, which model. And the whole thing became rather convoluted, and it was quite an interesting struggle. We became quite good at it, but when we launched our own model, which is sort of part of the evolution, we decided to try and bring our own model into it. We realized that, hey, all this inefficiency is probably why all these watches are so expensive. And we thought, well, if we're going to go with our mantra, which is how do we bring in more cost-effective watches, if we could reduce the overall cost of this channel to sell the watches, that would be the easiest way to maintain the quality, but also bring down the price. And that became our second goal. And we could only do that once we became a brand.
Now, normally that inefficiency you talk about, which again is, I've never quite heard it in that term, but I, of course, agree that that's a huge factor. And that's part of the frustration and maybe some of the charm of the luxury industry. But it's undeniably part of it. Oftentimes, those extra costs are passed on to the consumer, who sort of absorbs it because, I don't know, it's a luxury item, something like that. You decided differently. Was that related to your own values? Was the market saying, no, we only want to spend this amount on it? They were very price sensitive. Talk about why it was not attractive for you simply to pass that cost on.
Okay. The reason being is that was the whole mantra of why I started. As I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to see if we could produce or find a way of getting watches out to collectors so they could buy a watch at a much lower price point that they'd still have the high quality associated with it. Because that was something that I found frustrating as a collector. I love the joy of getting a new watch, right? I think a lot of people do. But when you're going to pay $10,000, $20,000 for that watch, it's not something most people can afford to do more than once a year, maybe once every 5 years, or maybe even just once a lifetime. Some people only buy one nice watch in their lifetime because that's all they could afford. So our challenge was to understand why that was the case. And when we started producing our own watches and understanding where the costs really were, I mean, I've got nothing wrong with putting pure gold into a watch and putting the value up. I think it's a good investment. I've got nothing wrong with putting diamonds into a watch or getting a handmade movement that costs a fortune to produce, because that adds value and quality to a watch. What I didn't like was the fact that you're putting margin on margin on margin just to get the watch out the door through a supply chain and put the price up. And that has to then be supported by huge marketing costs in order to get the value of that watch up to a point where they could sell it through that channel as well. And so we thought we'd take the opposite approach. Let's cut all that out and see what we could actually bring the watch back to and get a higher volume of sales directly to the consumer through e-commerce, which is what we've done. And by reducing that amount, give our customers a better value proposition. And they can then, we've got people out there that have 20 of our watches, right? And they can afford to buy 20 because our price point is not at the same level as, the higher end brands, which do go through the traditional expensive stores. If you drive past a Rolex shop, for example, the cost of the real estate alone is a fortune. So you can imagine the infrastructure needed to support that is going to push that price up. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a prestige brand. I think it's one part of the market. But we're trying to address a different part of the market, which is how do we get quality watches to people at a point where they can have 5 or 6 watches without having to necessarily go and get a second mortgage on their house,
I remember certain people I've known in the past have started watch brands, and I don't know if they tried to like go for high end, but it quickly became apparent their watches would need to be expensive. And then after their watches came out, they felt really sometimes bad or even embarrassed when their own friends and family and like a lot of their colleagues couldn't afford the watches. And it was it was a very strange experience for me to hear about it because I was trying to relate, and for them to, again, as you understand, make a product that no one can afford, and you're kind of like a jerk, right? Like they don't really get it, but they're like, "What's that? Why? Like why? Why would you make something that no one can afford?" So the psychology is interesting, isn't it?
Well, look, I think watches have become very much a status symbol, and there'll always be a demand for high-end watches, and I don't have nothing wrong with that. I think I like to own. I've got a collection of very nice high-end watches I'm very proud to own as well. But there is definitely also a market for people who don't want to buy a Casio, but want to have a nice watch when they will go out to dinner and drinks, but aren't that concerned about the status of it. They like the quality. They appreciate the fact it's mechanical. They like the design. They like the fact it's stainless steel, it's 200-meter waters, and all those nice features of the watch, but don't want to have to pay the overheads. And that's a different market, and that's the market we're trying to address. People that are pragmatic. I find myself a little bit like that. I like the excitement of getting a new watch, but it's got to be a high quality, and it's got to be something that I'm proud to own. But I don't necessarily want to pay huge amounts for it just to say I've got that particular brand or that particular status associated with the watch. That's a different market.
When did you first learn that, while not necessarily easy and by no means guaranteed, you could, if you worked hard enough and found the right partners, get a really nice watch made for not a crazy amount of money? Not everyone realizes that, even if those that are going in the business, they just assume things are be expensive. But if you do the right things and you take your time and you talk to the right people and you experiment, you can get an awfully nice watch made for not a crazy amount. I'm curious sort of when you came to that realization.
That was when we were at a trade show in Europe, and we were approached by a number of European partners in Germany, because we were at a trade show, I think, in Germany or the UK. And we were approached by a company and said, look, we can produce we liked their design. And we started out with originally our first design was a Flieger design, which is a pretty common pilot's watch design.
Sure.
We liked that, and we got a quote to build it, and we thought, okay, and we went for the AAA, stainless steel, 361L steel, sapphire glass, curved sapphire glass, which is quite a premium, anti-reflective coating. We put the works into it, right? Absolutely wanted to make it top notch. 100-meter water resistance, all the nice things you'd want in a watch. And they came back with a quote, and we realized that there's a massive gap between the production cost of a good watch and what prices are being sold for. And that tends to be what I was saying before. The gap tends to be caused by two or three things. One is the massive supply chain that they go through to get the watches out the door to these very expensive retail stores. And secondly, the marketing that goes behind it. Because if you've got Formula One or Brad Pitt or someone else doing your marketing, you've got to cover all those costs. And if you want to be a status, then you've got to have all of that, right? You can't, if you want a high status watch, you've got to have all of those components. You've got to have the store in the center of the CBD in the best location possible with people walking around in suits serving people when they come in. You've got to have the top stars wearing it or the best sports people wearing it. All of those costs add up, and they are the things that push the price up. I know what it costs to make a high-end watch, some of the high-end brands. It's very different to what most people think, but it's not what you're paying for, especially if they're the mass-produced type watches that come out a lot of Swiss manufacturers. They're not that expensive because they're all mass-produced anyway. But what you've got is this overhead that goes on top of it. And some people are happy to pay that because they want the status. But a lot of us, and I think there are a lot of our customers who will attest to this, they also want a watch they can wear day to day. And a lot of our customers own Rolexes, Breitling, Patek Philippe's, but they're quite happy to have one of ours in the collection because it's good quality, but they can wear it every day. The rest of them have to stay in the box,
Absolutely. A lot of brands who have to charge more for their watches point out to the fact, and a very true fact, that creating demand, like getting celebrity ambassadors or just, advertising in general, costs money. And therefore, you could have a much lower price, but then no one would want it. To create demand, you have to invest in the brand, so to say, and that demand later channels into sales. And so you have to pay for those types of costs. What is your strategy within, of course, this reality to create the demand that allows people to see your product, understand it, even come to learn about in the first place to make that decision? Obviously, you've done something. I'm just curious what it is.
We spend a fair bit on marketing, quite a significant amount on social media marketing. And that tends to be the number one source of our customers because we put them out there and we offer a 30-day return because we are based in Australia, as you pointed out at the beginning of the show here, but our biggest market is the US. We have 50% or 60% now of our sales are into the US.
Right.
And 80% of the sales we sell, or more than 80%, are outside of Australia. So it's quite a big challenge, and I'm not saying it's an easy one, to get people to buy a watch sight unseen without trying it on and then get them to purchase that with online through our channel, which is our main channel. But it does work because of the value prop that people see. We've got Swiss watches. We've got a lot, part of our range of Swiss-made watches. But the value proposition even on those is still very attractive compared to buying a traditional branded watch. And so a lot of people in the same boat that I would be in are willing to take a chance, take the watch, investigate, do the reviews, watch the review videos, and then make a decision to try it. And when they do, you can check out our reviews on our website. People are normally, overwhelmed at how good the watch is for what they paid for it when they get it.
I remember that certain brands early on that realized that social media was a good place to sell watches did really well. And there's some famous success stories, the MVMT and Daniel Wellingtons of the world who had really rock bottom prices because they had rock bottom product, but they sold a huge amount because they were able to cheaply get in front of consumers and tell the messages they wanted to hear without any
Very
filters
true.
or boundaries. Eventually, other brands sort of caught on to that. And now those spaces are very, very competitive when it comes to advertising, especially watch brand advertising. How do you, through your messages, differentiate Panzera? Because, of course, the same consumer is going to see other watch ads. How do you make your ads stand out in this highly competitive environment?
It's a very, very good point. And we're really focusing on something that we've discovered very important, and it took us a while to grasp this. People still want to, even though you're buying a watch, you want to know about the brand. So part of the reason I'm doing this podcast, and you may have seen on some of our posts, we're getting more of our founders involved, both Roger and myself, in presenting about ourselves and our brand and what we stand for, how we produce the watch, how they're made in Switzerland, or some of them are made in, half our watches are made in Switzerland, and the ones in Australia are hand assembled here. They're not made in China. They're basically coming in from a professional workshop, etc. Getting all that across has been the most important part, because we've got great products, but if you don't have a brand at all behind it and what we stand for, and the fact that we do try and produce, quality, high quality premium watches, but at a value price point, then that falls over because you get thrown into the bucket with everybody else. But it seems to be working. We've got a rapid growth of the business. We've got a lot of customers. And I think people who see the reviews on our website really appreciate that what we're doing is something different. We're not just producing, I remember, I think it was, I won't mention the brand, but one of the brands you're talking about there used to go on their website, and the criticism they used to get from their customers once the watch turned up was quite high, because they used to, I think, do the opposite, oversell the watch and then provide something that was pretty low quality when it turned up.
You make an excellent point there, and I think that any brand that has a direct-to-consumer sales model at a very early stage figures something out, and that thing is what you said, will somebody buy again?
Yes.
It makes a huge difference. The cost of initial customer acquisition only goes up. It's expensive today. It's not going to get any cheaper. So once you have them, if you can't sell them a second thing,
yes,
that's tough for business. And you're right. Some of those brands, the product was so underwhelming that they'd sell one time and that was it. And that was fine at the time when new customers were cheap. These days, that's no longer an option.
No.
If you can't do business again after you have acquired that consumer, you've got serious problems.
And that's a very good point. And I think the thing is, if you look back to what I was saying before, the reason we wanted to hit this price point and bring the quality down is so that people can buy more than one watch off us. If I'm selling $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 watches, you may get some very affluent people buying more than one, but not many. Whereas we have about 30 to 40% of our customers now have bought more than one of our watches. And that's a pretty big achievement for an online watch brand, because a lot of people will only buy one watch, and it's not something you buy multiple of unless you're very impressed with the first one. It's like selling fashion wear, where you sell a pair of pants, you sell them a T-shirt later. You sell them a watch, but the only thing we've got to sell them again is another watch. And watches are not something that often people buy in multiples. But I've got customers out there who have 15, 20 of our watches.
That's fantastic.
And that shows the quality that people are impressed. And they're not just our watches, but they also own the expensive brands as well, like the Rolexes and the Breitlings and the Omegas and the Pateks, because they like to have our watches as part of their collection because they feel they add a different dimension to what they've got in their box already,
I think there's an important point to be made here that I realized some time ago, and it seems obvious, but people don't talk about that much. And that has to do with the fact that as sexy of a brand as you make online, as great as your marketing is, as persuasive as your ads are, at the end of the day, there's going to be a human being that's going to look at the product and actually see it and ask themselves, is this nice?
Yes.
And what you're saying is that a lot of people have agreed after receiving the product, oh, this is pretty good. In fact, it's good enough that I think it's worth the money, and I'll buy another one. So even if you have a very slick interface and a great presentation online, and you even reach a whole lot of people, none of that really matters if you don't have the foundation of great product, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And you've got to be able to present. You can't be everything to everybody, but you've got to do what you claim to do well. So we don't pretend to make low-end watches at a low-end price. We don't pretend to make high-end, watches with a prestigious brand that's very exclusive. What we try to do is produce high-end watches at a very exceptional price point. And people that expect a high-end watch won't be disappointed when they get our watches. Quite the opposite.
I've identified a very important factor today in what I call the internet first era. And what I mean by internet first when it comes to the watch industry is people are learning about brands online first.
Yes.
They're probably thinking about and being educated about the brand online first. But with that said, increasingly I see people wanting to have at least one real world experience with that watch.
Yes.
Maybe seeing it on someone else's wrist, seeing it at a show, seeing it in a store. What is the sustainable, scalable way for you? And if you don't know it, that's fine, of making sure that people have that opportunity. Obviously, you have your generous return policy, but talk about that necessary real-world element.
That's a very interesting point you brought up, and it's something we've been thinking a fair bit about and have a bit of a strategy around. In Sydney, recently, probably not recently, but within the last, probably about 18 months, 2 years ago, we set up what we call a display studio. And we don't call it a retail store, but people can come in and we have an area allocated. It's adjoining to our workshop, so it makes it quite easy to manage. But we have people coming in. They can look at the watch. They can see the full range, try it on, and then online order it. If it's available in stock, we can get it assembled quickly, or available shipped, they can take it away with them. Worst case is they order online and it turns up within 2 or 3 days at home. We're not trying to stock a store with every variety, but people could come and try on the watch, then walk out with it. I'd love to duplicate that in each of our key markets, such as New York, Los Angeles, Tokyo, London, and I don't ever want to go down the track of where we've been, which was when we first started the business, of having thousands of retailers out there stocking our products, but having one more or less display studio in each of our key areas of market so people can go in and try the watch without the overhead of having to stock watches in a normal retail environment.
So I'm very curious about that. That's something I've been thinking about a lot. I definitely agree with you that type of showrooming space is a great idea. You've done it already. What did you learn? What are some of the surprising things? Are people patient, or do they need the watches right now? Talk a little bit about what you've observed now that the space exists.
Well, one of the things I'm quite impressed with is we get a lot of appointments. So people have to book online, which they don't mind doing. So they book a spot because we can't have 30 people all turn up at one time. So we try and
people
make
do it? They do it?
Yeah, 100%. They like it because they get personalised. We offer them a glass of wine and they can sit down and, have a relaxing experience. And they get the focus of having a salesperson or people show them through the range one-on-one, take them through, tell them the story, rather than milling around with a bunch of other people waiting to get served, which I think is a much more personalised way of doing it as well. But the conversion rate on that is almost 100%. So people that have booked appointments, I'd say at least 90 to 100% walk out with a watch once they've come in.
Interesting.
And that's a really good stat for us because it shows it is working.
And they're okay with waiting a while? Or, I a lot of retailers that say, consumers want it right now, you're going to lose them.
Well, we do generally find that we can convert a sale into a walking away with the watch because it's right next door to our assembly area, right? So we just keep watches in stock locally. But once again, we control the number, and we'd probably do that also if we were to set up overseas. So we do have stock, but what we don't do is have huge amounts of people all coming in wanting to buy the same watch on the same day. So, we can control the number going out. And that means we can keep it under a control in terms of managing the stock per store.
I don't know a lot about the business environment in Australia, and I'm curious, what are some of the advantages or maybe the challenges that exist in, running a watch company in Australia?
The most challenging aspect, I think, the least challenging aspect, I think, which is probably worth bringing up first, which I thought most people would think about, would be logistics of getting the product out to our customers who are all in a different country. But we can ship anywhere in the world in 4 or 5 days. US normally 3 days. So that hasn't proven to be as big a challenge. I think the biggest problem we have is what you just raised. Getting someone to buy a watch without touching and feeling it first, and not having local representation, physical representation in those countries. And that's been a mental mindset shift that we've had to get with our customers. And the fact we've been so successful shows, I think, that people are so impressed with a product, they're willing to break their normal behavior, which is not to buy a watch without physically touching it first, And that has been our biggest challenge, especially being Australian, because I think if we're based in the US, okay, well, sort of a US company, I feel safe buying it. I know I can return it easily if I'm not happy with it, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest, I think, hurdle is a mental one with our customers. How do we get them to buy from Australia? And I think the Australian concept can be a positive or a negative. Some people think, ooh, Australian brand, never heard of a watch from Australia. That's a bit risky. Others think, wow, I can't wait to go and tell my mates I bought a watch from Australia because that's really cool. No, they're not going to have a watch from Australia. And the exclusivity side of it on watches is quite a big aspect. So people think, wow, it's a talking point. I'll buy one. I want to buy an Australian watch.
One of the very first advertisers on aBlogtoWatch was a New Zealand brand called Magret.
Okay.
And I remember at the time thinking to myself, like, wow, that's really novel. A watch brand in New Zealand, which is,
even
smaller than Australia, just as remote. And ever since that time, my mind has been very open that you can have a watch brand anywhere. Yeah. So I totally get it, but you're right. Most people, it seems like a very out of the way place to have, it's not that Australia can't, it's not on a lot of people's mind. Once you get to know Australia, you realize they have all the same stuff and same mentalities everywhere else. But for a lot of people that are not familiar with that, you're right. It's not logical.
No, it's not. And the irony is, I'll tell you something interesting. Although they tend to be our Swiss-made models, Switzerland is one of our biggest markets. So we're actually selling Australian-made or Australian-companied watches back into Switzerland, which is quite interesting. And I think they might be looking for something a bit more novel than buying a local watch as well. So, it's interesting.
The Swiss is interesting. They're definitely not their biggest spenders, right? Like the Swiss don't buy the most expensive Swiss watches. And a lot of them, because as you said, they're familiar with the business practices, they understand about the markups and the margins, they are very sensitive to overspending. Yes. So they trust their own country's watches the least when it comes to value proposition.
Yes. Well, the watches they tend to buy tend to often be our Swiss-made ones, the ones we do make in our Lugano workshop. But they are aware that we're Australian brands, so it's interesting that they would be buying from outside their own area.
I think that the Swiss market is surprisingly open-minded. You see everything there. You see their own handmade watches, all the way to things that are not Swiss at all. I have to give a lot of credit to the Swiss market. Now, Swiss-made is important. You have a lot of your watches do the final assembly in Switzerland. But what's interesting is Swiss-made is a relatively lenient origination term in the scheme of things. Made in America, for example, is much, much more stringent. And I'm curious, you have this facility in Australia where you're assembling watches. That's very exciting. What would it take to have a watch that actually says made in Australia? And is that something you'd ever even want?
Well, it's more challenging. Ironically, we went down that track. Swiss-made means you've got to have the vast majority, including the movement, made in Switzerland, okay? Australian-made means something similar, but where can you get an Australian-made watch movement?
You can't.
It's very hard, almost impossible. I don't think there's anyone that doesn't. So it's almost impossible to get an Australian-made watch because the movement's always the biggest cost of a watch.
Right.
And that means that when that component comes from outside of Australia, which is inevitably it will, and you'd want it to because the best ones are either Japanese or Swiss, right? You're going to end up a watch that no longer complies with the majority of its components being assembled in Australia. So we did get on that track, and a lot of customers said, why don't you make them made in Australia? Well, quite simple. You show us we can get an Australian-made movement, and we might be able to do it. But I would be not sure I'd want to use it. I'd be happier to use the more proven movements that are out there from overseas.
Movado has been making watches for well over 100 years. It all started in 1881 in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland. At the beginning of the 20th century, Movado started producing hundreds of wristwatch models while other companies were still focused on pocket watches. Early watch designs often eschewed round cases for alternative shapes. Square-shaped wristwatches were an immediate hit with consumers from the very beginning. As early as 1917, Movado was releasing square watches at the outset of the Art Deco era just before the Roaring Twenties. Today, Movado honors that legacy with the new Heritage 1917 collection of men's and women's timepieces drawn directly from the authentic 1917 design. The Movado Heritage 1917 family of wristwatches features a variety of styles, including automatic mechanical movements in all of the 35mm wide versions. Inspired by the past, but faithful to modern expectations, the 1917 watches feature classic, legible dials, modest wearing proportions, and are available in a men's 35mm wide size and a women's 25mm wide size, as well as a choice of bracelet or strap attachment options. Designed with all wearers in mind, the Heritage 1917 is nevertheless an enthusiast product, featuring design excellence and Swiss-made mechanisms. Check out the Movado Heritage 1917 watches at department stores, select jewelers, or online at movado.com. We saw this in the United States over the last decade or so. There's been a lot of smaller brands popping up, and a lot of them have had that dream. Wouldn't it be great to make a watch in America again? Obviously, America used to be the largest,
Donald Trump will wear one.
Oh boy, that's a whole other story. But again, used to be a huge market. Then all of that infrastructure for the industrial part went away. And today, I have to say, Andrew, now there are true made in America watches. It took a while.
Yeah.
So there is hope. When I first started doing this, no, you could not really buy a made in America movement. And a few weeks ago, even, I visited a manufacturer here in Los Angeles that's making movements. And pretty soon they're going to be making things like hairsprings, right? And the whole deal for the mechanical movement. I'm a bit cynical, right? I think consumers are like, yeah, I don't really care where it's made as long as it's good. It's not too expensive. You agree with that?
I agree. And I think, look, it could be a novelty factor. If you had a made in America watch, it could be, and America's a big enough market by itself to absorb a made in America watch. Just from a patriotic point of view, you may end up buying them, and if even a small percentage buy them in America, it'll be a big enough market to sell to. We wouldn't have a big enough market in Australia if everybody in Australia, even who buys watches, bought one. It would be still a relatively small number of watches. So I think it's having your home market there could give you a big advantage of making that work. I think it could go ahead.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me as more and more brands show up. Each of them has to have a reason for existence beyond nice design at low price or something like that. And there's all this experimentation. Some of them is the materials that the watches are made of. Some of them are where the watches are made. It's just interesting to see these layers and layers of justification, as well as how consumers respond to it. You, like me, probably like to watch consumers, observe how they respond, what they're drawn to, and things like that. And I'm always interested in what draws people into this hobby. When someone is excited about their watch, I love it. I don't care what they like. I just like it when someone's excited about their watch.
Yes.
And some people, this is where it's made, is really exciting to them. Again, I'm a bit more cynical about it. I'm more into design and quality and things like that. But you have to sort of, find where the consumer is and meet them there. And I think that's the beauty of watches, that there's so many different consumers wanting different things. That's why there's such a variety of brands.
Well, that's a very important point, and that's something we made a lot of mistakes of when we first started the business.
In what way?
We thought we'd diversified all different types of, radical concepts, small watches and minimalistic watches, and do this. But then we found that one particular style, which is the big, bold, sort of water-resistant, quite a large watch, gravitated for us. People gravitated towards that, and it became known as the Panzera style. And once we grasped that, it made it so much easier for us to be successful because we had a persona for our watch. I mean, it sort of goes with the Australian side of it, which is, we're an outdoor country, a bit like, California. We go surfing, we do this. We want a big, bold, waterproof, rugged watch that you can also wear to the office. That was our concept. And we're out to dinner on a nice dinner or go to a black tie function. The watch shouldn't have to be swapped between going to the beach and going to a black tie event in the evening. That's our concept for all of our watches. And that is what we've stuck with. And by doing that, we've really gained a strong audience, I think.
So thank you for sharing that. And I'm so happy you found your niche. That's very important. I'm fascinated by this period of time where you're trying to find what that market segment was. And some brands never find it, right? And others are lucky enough to find it. Sometimes they find it with their icon product, right? That one watch that they just can't seem to find anything else that works. Now, what I find interesting about this is that there's experimentation period where you're like, I'm not really sure who wants what we're doing. So we're going to make a bunch of different things. Talk about some of the roads you went in. And then actually, we're never going to realize why that's your niche, but help me understand how you realized that was your niche. What were the signals that said, we need to make big sport watches?
Okay. We had a range. We've always had a range of different watches, but when we bought out a new model, it didn't take us long to figure out whether that was going to be successful or not when you compare the sales against the other ones. Now, we had one watch, which was our Aquamarine range, which was the Aquamarine 45. That did gangbusters, and we always benchmarked everything against that. And we thought, okay, well, maybe it's just dive watches. But then we brought out a large Classivo dress watch that was also sort of a completely different design, much more of a dressy style watch, but also big and bold and stood out. It did pretty well too, equally well. We brought out a small watch, which was a Time Master 42, which was more of a sort of a more minimalistic style watch, didn't do so well. So when we learnt this over a period of time, that the smaller, more minimalistic, less bold, less substantive watches weren't going to do as well. We then latched on, well, okay, let's keep this design of big, bold, water resistant, change the variations from dress to sports but keep that overall concept of big, bold and standing out. And that's what's worked really well for us. The other thing that's been really useful for us is we tried pre-ordering, and that's been a really, really good way for us to understand how successful watch is going to be, because what we do is we launch a watch. We've got 2 at the moment in pre-order where people can get in early, get a good discount on the watch, but order it for 3 or 4 months ahead before we bring out the first production of it. So we know before we've even produced the watch how successful it's going to be. And that gave us a bit more room to experiment with different models and only produce small numbers of them if they weren't going to be successful.
Now, again, I always like to play the devil's advocate here. You've clearly found what works for that audience.
Yep.
The question is it worth growing that audience, finding more individuals like that? Or is that, is having one audience like having all your eggs in one basket, and that you should try to find things that work for other audiences? Again, I'm not saying there's any one way, but always thinking about continuity. And I'm guessing you're someone that likes to think long-term. You want to protect yourself against changes in trends and shock. You need to diversify. Talk about, juggling these factors.
Okay, well, that's a very good point. I mean, we've definitely wanted to diversify because we didn't want to just become a dive watch company, and we diversified. Our original watches were in pilot's watches, and we've sort of producing those. And then we went into GMT watches, which has done really well for us. And we produced dress watches. And now we're producing ladies' watches. But what I suppose I'm saying is we've got a diversification of our range across quite a few different areas, but there's a common thread. And that is we're not into meek, mild. You know, someone was saying the other day to me, oh, we've heard watches are getting smaller now. You know, you should go back to, shouldn't you be producing small watches or minimalistic watches with only, you know, no numbers and just hands and not much else on the dial? They're becoming more in style. Well, sorry, that's not for us. That's not where we stand, and it's not where we want to be. Our view is we want to have a diverse range of watches so that people who like it, a good dress watch can buy one, a pilot's watch can buy one, a dive watch they can buy one, a ladies' watch, but they've got to have a Panzera branding over them. And I think Rolex do a good job of it. I mean, they don't go out into a huge diversification of watches, but they, when you look at a Rolex, you recognise it's a Rolex, right? It stands for something. And I'd like Panzera to stand for that as well. And our customers who we've grouped together and often buy, as you pointed out, buy multiple watches, they don't want to have, you know, a complete radical change away from what we do as our core product. And I think being Australian, you've got to have something to stand behind, which is our motto is, if you're going to wear a watch, show it off. You don't want to have something that is a tiny little thing that sits like a bracelet on your wrist, and you've got to
I'm sorry, I have to be cliche, but this is that Crocodile Dundee movement with a knife.
Yes.
Okay.
That's not a watch. This is a watch.
Exactly. So related to this, I have in the past studied this through the brand Invicta.
Yeah,
now,
I know Invicta quite well, yes.
If you like watches, you're an enthusiast, you're a collector, it's sort of like a fun brand to make fun of because it's never really supposed to be for the enthusiast in the way we think about it. But Invicta, at least traditionally, was a very successful company and had, you know what, like you were saying, lots of repeat business. And while all the watch people were making fun of it, I was sitting there trying to study who is this consumer? Because they're not at these little events. But who are these people? And what I realized, there's a big dividing line in the world between the sort of, we'll call it the small watch and big watch enthusiasts. It's a cultural difference. These people don't get along. Obviously, they're both markets. But the small watch guy, so to say, and again, I'm generalizing, but I'm just using this right now as sort of a differentiator. The small watch guy does not know the world of the big watch guy. The big watch guy thinks the small watch guy, you know, is pretentious or exclusionary or something like that. And again, it's not that one is right or wrong, but these are totally different individuals. And I've seen both sides of it. And Invicta is a brand that has sold to that big watch guy. Now, maybe they sell to and again, I have a lower sophistication individual, an individual that doesn't look at them and be like, you know, I think that design could be better. They don't know, but it's bold and it's big and it makes them feel something. Yeah. And the brand is not talking down to them. The brand is at least talking horizontally to them. And that's really, really important because I think a lot of individuals out there, taste aside, feel that luxury brands talk down to them, like there's something wrong with them.
Yes, that's true.
And that does not jive well with a lot of people. The French think that's the way to do it. And I'm sorry, the way to sell people things is not to make everyone feel insecure all the time, right? Like imagine, again, as an American guy, I guess Australian guy, go into like France or Italy to buy men's clothing. What a humiliating experience that is.
Yes.
Okay. You're there with your money and your excitement. You're like, oh, this world's not for me. So there's this huge number of people out there who feel that they've been excluded.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Oh, well, try and walk into a Rolex shop as a person who doesn't own a Rolex and try and buy one.
Yeah, they don't value your money. And when you talk to someone who does seem to value it, you're like, oh.
I want to buy one of those. No, you can't. Here, I'll put your name on a mailing list. Maybe in 6 months we'll get back to you when we feel you might be worthy to buy a Rolex watch, you know?
There's a huge volume of consumers that approach totally backfires on.
Yes.
And I've told Rolex this. I've said, can you imagine the number of people who you not only didn't sell a watch to, but you turned off from ever rewarding themselves with a watch? I used to make the joke. They're like, oh, you're not going to sell this to me? Okay, I'll go buy that Harley Davidson. Screw watches.
Or go down to the Amiga shop or the...
No, because for them, they've been told if you're successful, go buy yourself a Rolex. They're so turned off by this idea that they've been rejected, they won't even think of another brand. They're turned off from the entire concept of rewarding themselves with a timepiece.
And that's sort of the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're saying we'll supply watches to you all around the world at a reasonable price, and we want to make our watches as accessible as possible. We're not going to make you feel excluded, because the idea is we're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to sell you something that, A, you'd feel is good value, but secondly, I don't care where you are in the world or where you want to be, you can buy a watch. And that's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do with what we're doing.
Now, I'm guessing that after people become your customers, there's some extended customer service, some type of appreciation. What do you do to make sure that the people who have already done business with you hear about you, feel valued, and, continue to interact with you?
Our biggest asset at the moment, and I should have probably brought this up as part of our sales strategy, is we've offered a very generous discount on our first watch, because what we've tried to do is if you're a first-time buyer, we want to get you over the line to buy it. That's the highest risk point, right? The first-time purchaser. But in order to get that discount, you have to sign up to our mailing list. So we have a very large mailing list, both of people that have purchased and haven't purchased and whatever else. And so what we do is we retain communication to our customers, and we offer them, customers get special offers. So we often give away a code for our customers who've purchased a watch before. To say for the next 7 days, you can use this code, only given to customers, existing customers. We're about to launch potentially, I suppose it goes a little bit against our non-exclusivity clause, but we are thinking of bringing out a very high-end watch.
Oh.
And that will only be available to people who have purchased one of our other watches before, because it'll be very limited edition model. We're calling it the Founders Edition. So
cool.
That might be coming out, at some point in the future. So we try and get people to be participating and offer them special deals, special promotions, and definitely stay in touch through our emailing list to our existing install base, because you're right. And I recommend go through and have a look at some of our reviews on our website. The number of people that say, got the watch, it's amazing, can't wait for my next one, or this is my third watch I bought off you, my fourth watch, is really fascinating and both rewarding for us, because we know we've hit a chord with those people. So
now, roughly 16 years into the business, where do you find you have the most happiness? Are you a product design guy? Do you like marketing? Do you like dealing with the numbers? Do you like team building? Where is your personality finding most of its expression in the business right now?
That's an interesting point too, and I was thinking about this the other day. I think I still love designing new watches. I love planning 3 or 4. We would normally have 3 or 4 in the pipeline in one instance. I love the creative side of designing something, and I feel a lot more at home now that we have this fundamental basis of knowing what a Panzera watch has to have in it, but then trying to diversify that out into a new area and finding gaps in our range where we think we could fill new models. So the design side I really love. Some of the creative aspects of the marketing side I really enjoy too. Especially now we've got a really good marketing guy on board to help us do some strategy around that, and getting Roger and I into the limelight where we have to go to Europe and do exciting things like go skiing and take videos of ourselves doing it. It's quite an interesting part of the business too, to try and give the founders a personality and a persona that sort of matches what we do, but also matches what we want to be associated with the brand, and talking about what we've got coming up on videos and things, and even participating in, podcasts like this one is really something I find quite interesting, because we've got great ideas and great brand, but getting it out there is something that I enjoy doing. Letting people know why we're doing it and what we've done.
In terms of making watches, there's an interesting trend that I've noticed, and it's not all the time, but it's common. And the trend is, as you get more successful and get more into it and enjoy making watches, as you said, the tendency is to make more complicated watches, which adds to the price. And then therefore the tendency is for the brand, while it may make better and better watches, also makes more and more expensive watches. Is that a trend that you're okay with? Do you try to limit that trend and stick at certain price points? I'm just wondering the types of barriers you've created for yourself, or is there a risk of, again, trying to make something so nice that your customer base can no longer afford it?
Well, I think that's part of the diversification. We bought out well, it was interesting because all our watches were at the same price point, the Australian-made ones, and we thought we'd experiment with a very high or a higher-end Swiss chronograph, which is our Aquamarine 45C, which is sort of about 5 or 6 times the price point of our...
Oh, that much?
Yeah, it's a big difference of our other watches. And we thought, well, this is a bit of a high-risk thing, but we'll do it in low volume. But it has become one of our best sellers. And
interesting.
It is interesting because, once again, I think the people that are interested in Swiss watches also love this concept of having more affordable value proposition, because that watch, although it's 5 times the price of our existing Australian-made watches, is probably still a third the price of what you'd pay for it if you had a high branding on it, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
Still very good value. And that's given us a lot of... It's also acted as a bit of a halo model. I think what's happened is people say, wow, if they can produce a watch of that sort of quality and that caliber made in Switzerland with a chronograph movement, then the other watches can't be bad either. And so people that do bounce off that and say it's too expensive come back down and buy one of the others. So our strategy is always to keep those affordable mid-tier watches available, but continue to grow also separately the higher end watches, and maybe even push it up a level higher now based on the success we've had, but not to exclude people, because I think it's 2 different markets. I think people that buy the high end watches from us are not the same customers that buy the mid tier, and you don't want to alienate them, as you point out, by having all of your watches move up to that level, you know?
I've seen a lot of brands do that, especially in the context of the traditional luxury watch market and Swiss brands, who even before things like American tariffs over the last... They're really accelerated over the last couple of years, have really jacked up prices appreciably. And many of them have believed that consumers will just follow along and put up with it and continue buying from them. And that's not what's been happening. And I've warned them. So I've been seeing firsthand what happens when brands vastly increase their prices or slowly creep them up, or, you know, once in a while will come out with a model that's much less expensive and do great and wonder why, and be like, well, because that's what people want to spend on your brand. Not that crazy amount. I remember years ago, I had a difference of opinion, if you will, with Omega. And the difference of opinion was about the price of the Speedmaster. And I said, you know what you guys should do is always keep the Speedmaster a low priced entry level model. Be a loss leader. I don't care. Charge like, I said to them, I think I said like $3,000 at the time. And I still believe it should be an inexpensive watch that gets people in. You want to make sure that everyone getting into watches has an Omega Speedmaster as like one of their first things. They'll come back to the brand later. And their opinion was no. And now it's like $15,000 or way up depending on the material. So I think that it's extremely interesting to just be aware of the consumer and the sensitivity. And as you said, you have to not abandon them, because they can feel abandoned. Having different product levels is fine, but then you have to have, in my opinion, simultaneously different conversations with different people. Don't have the $5,000 watch conversation with people who want to spend under $1,000. It causes friction.
Absolutely right. And look, we've got a mailing list, as I mentioned. It's quite a big asset for us of several 100,000 people now. If we were to move away from the watches that they joined the mailing list to purchase and move upstream too far, then we've lost the value in that mailing list, because we would no longer have any to sell them. We'd have to go for a whole new one. And the other danger is, you move into a market that is very heavily occupied in that sort of, once you get above that price point, you're then competing with brands that you can go to a store and buy, right? And try it on and make sure it fits and all that sort of thing. The whole value proposition, what we're trying to do is say, look, we'll cut out all these costs to keep the price down for you, the consumer, not make extra profit by pushing the prices up, but still retaining the same model. And that is what we've been trying to do all along, is keep that price point, and we shall. So as long as we're making, watches in Australia with Japanese movements, they should be suitably priced at that point.
Yeah.
For a Swiss chronograph made in Switzerland, it has to be more expensive. But as I said, even that is relatively cheap for a Swiss chronograph made in Switzerland, right? It's lower.
Now, from what I can tell, Panzera has sort of mostly existed in a silo. You've sort of done your own marketing.
Yep.
You yourself know what the product is and what you want. You don't necessarily need to go to trade shows and stuff like that. You don't need to really market in those types of places. You've kind of done your own thing. Do you ever think about the other approach, go into those shows, being with other brands? Obviously, there's pluses and minuses, but talk a little bit about your decision to, like some other brands, not many, but like some other brands, really exist on a periphery.
Well, it's an interesting one. We used to go to Basel World and more for inspiration, to see what other brands are doing, and it's good to do that. Then COVID came along and they've sort of made Basel World a little bit less popular, and it hasn't really taken off.
Well, it's dead. There's no more Basel World.
There is no Basel World, exactly. So it's
less
just
popular, no popular.
So that sort of disappeared. We went to the London Watch Show at one stage, which was really quite an interesting exhibition. So we like doing it, but it's more for inspiration to see what other brands are doing. And in the end, we thought, well, what do you get out of it as opposed to going to a shopping mall and going around and see what the other brands are selling? And it's a long way to go and it's a lot of expense and et cetera. So we've sort of dropped out of that. And we've definitely are very happy to drop out of the trade shows where you have to go and try and sell to retailers and convince them to put the stock in the stores. So really, I think the main benefit we get out of any sort of interaction with other, and we have visited a few other brands, we've been to their factories, which has been quite interesting, is learning how other brands operate and what they're doing and what the direction they're going is, and see if there's any inspiration for us to learn from that. We do get some inspiration, the way they market, the way they're positioning their watches, that sort of stuff has been quite interesting. We bring that back on board. But outside of that, no, we haven't done a lot of interactive trade show type activities. And having been through it in the past, I can't say I miss it terribly much.
In the remaining minutes, I wanted to talk about the military clientele.
Yes.
That you have. I don't know how big of the business that is, but I know that you have, I guess what they call squadron watches and things like that. Talk a little bit about the types of things you offer the military and what's interesting about that side of the business.
Yeah, look, it's a relatively new area for us. We were approached by the US Air Force Aggressor Squadron, and for those that aren't familiar with them, they're like the guys in Top Gun who fly against the pilots to simulate
like the dogfighting.
The dogfighting. They're the ones that train the pilots on what they should be doing to.
They're the teachers as well.
They're more or less teachers. They basically fly in the same manner that an opposing military group would fly against them, and they teach the pilots in Top Gun type schools. The US Air Force training, advanced training, I think they call it. They teach them how to behave and fly against them. And so they came to us and said, look, so they're really the top best of the best. They're recruited out of the best of the pilots they have in the Air Force to really go up against the pilots and teach them what they should be doing in dogfighting and advanced weapons tactics. So really cool bunch of guys. And they wanted to have an aggressor's watch made, and they came to us and asked if we could do it. And we came up with some ideas and we produced it. And so now they have been using that as their squadron watch. And we'd over met them actually, flew over to the US and met them, some of the pilots and their and some of the people that have moved on from that squadron, but still part of the team and the affiliation with them. And that was really good. And that led to some other opportunities. We're now doing one for the RAAF, which is Australian Air Force. And there's another US Air Force squadron have inquired about getting one made up for them as well. So it's become sort of word of mouth that's now taken off, and we're now producing a lot of these watches. Now, in terms of quantity, it's good, but the real opportunity is, of course, to use that as a marketing aspect. I mean, to get a US Air Force squadron to use your R watches as their preferred watch is a real coup, and I like it because it wasn't something put through where we marketed to the US Air Force they should buy them, but the pilots came to us. They actually bought one of our watches, liked it so much, they wanted to get it made up as a squadron
So
piece.
you've worked with a few of these deals, and presumably you'll do more, and congratulations there. But what have you learned these types of clients are looking for? Obviously, there's plenty of other pilot watches on the market. They have options. Of course, they liked individuality. What have you found that these types of customers are really seeking?
Well, first of all, we have a dedicated number of pilots' watches, so they like the fact that we're into pilots' watches, not just a generic watch.
Right.
That's number one. Second point is they wanted something that's accessible because, once again, a lot of brands have tried to get into the Air Force or have gotten into the Air Force and provided them, such as big brands like Breitling, etc., who have the affiliation. By the time they've customized the watch and put them out there, a lot of the watches are out of reach of the pilots themselves to purchase. And they're not given to them, right? They have to go out and buy them. So
they get a discount, but yeah, they're still asked to pay a lot of money.
And a lot of the pilots didn't end up buying one because they were so outside of the reach. A lot of them didn't want to fork out that much to buy a watch. So they didn't really take off as well as they could have. Whereas our watches are accessible so that pretty much when they said they wanted 60 watches for the squadron, all 60 were sold because they were, affordable. Once again, the quality was there, but they didn't have to pay the price point. And we also customized the watches very specifically, and we're willing to customize the watches. Being a smaller brand, we can afford to do that. We could customize them exactly the way they wanted them. So they had the logo on the dial and the engraving on the back of the watch that they wanted. And they're a very nice watch to wear. But I think that's the main thing. They wanted a watch that's both customized but accessible, because without accessibility, it's all very good to have a squadron watch, but only 6 people out of the 30 buy one. It doesn't really become very meaningful,
What are they looking for emotionally or design-wise?
They wanted something specific because it's almost like a patch on a jacket, and it's worn as much outside of the flight area as it is in, to sort of say, hey, I'm an aggressor pilot, and look at me, I've got my aggressor watch. So not everyone would know what it means, but other aggressor pilots know, and makes them feel part of that brotherhood. One thing I learned from going to the US, these guys are really tight. Like, even once they leave the squadron and they become alumni, they still stay in touch and they hang out together. They still use their call signs as their names instead of their names. So there's a very tight brotherhood amongst these squadron people. And
it's a great market to get into.
It's a great market. And so to have a watch they can walk around with their logo on it, which is quite subtle, but means a lot. It's a nice way of affiliating themselves.
Have they started sending you like combat selfies and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah, we've got that. And we've also been given call signs, Roger and I, for meeting them. So I'm T-Bone, by the way. T-Bone is my call sign.
You're lucky. That's cool call sign. But you're lucky that it's Air Force, because I know some brands that put their watches on like infantrymen and stuff like that. They'll get some very weird, like wrist shots of, in combat zones, not just with guns, with, casualties or sometimes prisoners or hairy situations. And brands have been like, I can't ever share these on social media. I guess it's cool that that's what they're wearing it. But people would be surprised in a combat situation, soldiers being like, yo, let's take a watch shot. Like, it's a real thing. It happens. I was surprised by it the first time. The second time, by like the 5th or 6th time I saw, I was like, okay, this is a trend. This isn't just one random watch-loving soldier out there. Like, this is a thing. It's kind of, it's good for the hobby, but it's kind of funny, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one brand I quite admire is called Bremont, and they're a UK-based brand, and they have a watch that you can only get one if you've been ejected by a Baker ejection
the
seat
Martin
out
Baker.
of a plane. I thought, like, that's a pretty exclusive club to be in. And I'm just trying to imagine a selfie as you're coming out of the ejection seat, you know? It's sort of be pretty cool.
Yeah, well, you get the watch afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to survive first.
Yeah.
I went to Martin Baker. I visited their factory in in England, and I heard the whole story. And I was like, I need to know exactly the parameters. They have a list of all the people, and the funny thing is, it's everyone that survives the ejection seat has the option of buying it. Not all do, but as you would imagine, most do.
Yes. And I think that's what a good timepiece is about. And I think we lose track of that. And that is that a timepiece is no longer for telling the time, right? It is no longer something you need to carry because you've got the time on your phone. You know, aircraft have very sophisticated time and navigation tools. It's no longer needed to fly a plane, or it used to be back in the 40s and 50s. And people buy it for two reasons. One is it's a status symbol and it's a personality symbol. It shows a bit about who you are as an individual. If you're wearing a pilot's watch, it shows not necessarily a pilot, but you aspire towards being a pilot or you like aviation. If you're wearing a dive watch, it means you might go to the pool at a hotel, right? You want something that goes waterproof, but it shows you're interested in more marine type activities. But most importantly, it can also be something that commemorates a point in your life. And you know that when you buy that watch, you'll always remember that particular activity or point. I got one when I got engaged. I bought a Bell & Ross watch, which I really loved at the time when I got engaged, because I thought that's something that I'll always remember when I wear that watch, is getting engaged. When I got a new job, I bought another watch, and I bought that because, and so watches can commemorate things. And I think, these watches that are being bought by these squadrons are, in 50 years' time, when I'm no longer flying this jet, I want to be able to remember that I was part of this team. And a watch is something that will go with me forever, right? It's not something you throw away.
Absolutely. I call them sentiment sponges.
Exactly. And that's why a mechanical watch, I think, is so much better for that sort of purpose, because you can maintain a mechanical watch for 20 generations down the track if you look after it. Whereas
absolutely.
You're not going to get although a quartz digital watch might be, or an Apple watch might be more functional, it's never going to fulfill that particular role,
It doesn't have the personality. Well, this is a good place to end. Andrew, please tell the audience where they can find out about Panzera or learn more about the brand on the internet.
That's very easy. Just remember www.panzerawatches, all one word, .com. And it's everything's there. And make sure, I think the first thing for customers do, go through and read some of our reviews from other customers. That'll give you a bit more of a feel and also confidence about what the product we're offering is about.
Excellent. This has been the Superlative podcast interview with co-founder of Panzera Watches, Andrew Herman. Andrew, thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure, Ariel. Thank you very much for having me.